Hello, health seekers. Welcome to another episode of the KetoPro Podcast with myself, Richard Smith. Today, I'm joined with a very good friend of mine, Simon Lewis. Simon runs the How to Carnivore page and other things also. So let's get into this. Simon, welcome on board.
Rich, thanks for having me here. Very excited to chat with you.
Pleasure's all mine. This has been a long time in the making.
Yes.
We've tried a number of times to get this. Obviously, there's a big time difference between you and I. I think you said it's currently 7:30 with you, 9:30 with me. But look, we're dedicated to the cause, and we're both here. And fantastic. Super looking forward. Simon, for the listeners who are not familiar with you and what you do, could you give us a quick breakdown?
Yeah, sure thing. So I am obviously very interested in the carnivore space. It all started for me when I was a kid. I was a child who couldn't sit still at school, mood swings, sort of erratic behavior. But deep down, I was a nice kid and I didn't want to be like that. I did actually want to be a productive person, but at times my mood and my behavior was just so out of control. And the teacher, this is when I was about 11 or 12, and I'm at what we call primary school. And the teacher said to my parents, he's a good kid, but I'm pretty sure he's got ADHD. You should go and get him tested. My parents thought, oh, wow, okay, well, that kind of makes sense, I suppose. What should we do? And the teacher said, well, before you go and get him on the ADHD medication, why don't you get his allergies tested? And perhaps it's something to do with food, because, I've heard of this before where the food can sort of send kids crazy. And my parents thought, fantastic, before we go down the medication route, let's see if we can, get to the root cause of this. And so I got my allergies tested, and I was intolerant to gluten and dairy. And that was quite a relief, because we thought, all right, well, it's these two particular things, particularly, and also back then, people didn't know what gluten was, because we're talking 22 years ago. So that was also like, okay, let's work out what gluten is. And, Simon must be very unusual because he happens to be sensitive to it. And also dairy, well, I'm sure we can find a way around that. So I was fortunately placed on a gluten and dairy-free diet, which meant all the grains were gone. Obviously, all the milk and ice cream and stuff like that was gone as well. And my diet started to center more around meat and whole fruit and vegetables, which was excellent. So I would go to school with a container, and it would have chopped up beef and rice. And we wouldn't even use soy sauce. We would use like a bit of tamari. So it was just a much better option. And I would have things like eggs for breakfast. And I noticed straight away how much better I felt. And there wasn't this crazy side that would sort of be a bit out of control and mood swingy and tantrumy and all that sort of stuff. Like that basically went away. And I found that, at that age, basically all I cared about was sport. So, I wanted to be able to play Australian football and run, and I wanted to be nice and fit. Well, my fitness started to improve, and I had less aches and pains. And I was still young, but I didn't have a problem with doing this so-called diet. Like, it didn't bother me because I still got to eat really good foods, and I could feel better. So from a young age, I was like, okay, what you eat and what you put into your body makes a huge difference on how you feel. Mainly that was the big thing for me, how I feel and my mental clarity and just my happiness. But then also the physical stuff as well. I could tell, oh, you've got to put the right stuff in, because it will make a big difference when you go and play sport. And then so, in typical fashion, I sort of weaned off and got back into eventually sort of like what normal teenagers eat, and early 20s, drinking and partying and all that sort of stuff. It did go a bit off the rails, but I always knew, particularly with gluten, I was like, whenever possible, avoid eating that, because it was pretty clear that was terrible for me. And then when I hit my middle 20s and I was working full time, it's like, all right, you need to have a good hard look at your lifestyle, because you're sitting at a desk a lot, and you have limited time to exercise, and you're getting a little bit older, so it's easier to put on body fat. Think about, what would be a healthy diet and also a convenient diet for your life. And that's where I gravitated towards a paleo diet, because that made so much sense to me. It's like, all right, we'll just stick to the whole foods. And I would eat a lot of things like tins of tuna, I would eat chicken. I would eat beef. It was all pretty lean. It's almost like it was basically a bodybuilder's diet. I would have, controlled portions of rice, occasionally things like beans. So pretty kind of straightforward, and I was doing okay on that. But then I started to hear things about a ketogenic diet, and I was really curious about going into ketosis. And I thought, okay, well, what would that do for my brain if I was in ketosis? You sort of, I think often when you hear about keto for the first time, you think, oh, this is going to be, like Bradley Cooper in Limitless. And, I did think that. So I was like, okay, well, I've got to try that. It actually was like that when I first went into ketosis. It was amazing. Like the concentration, I was so zoned in and I could just keep on working. So then it's sort of like a bit of an arc of life because I believe at different stages in life, you have different priorities and you also have different interests. And I think that's completely normal. Something might be so important to me in my early 20s, like, going to festivals. But now that I'm in my, early 30s, that is not a priority for me. So your priorities and your interests really change. And then, I started to think, okay, well, I need to be able to work more. I want to feel good. I'd love to be able to do a day's work and then come home and also work on a project and not be tired, not be moody, not be hungry, all that sort of stuff. I want to just keep going. It's like you, Rich. It's 9:30 p.m. On a Sunday night, and you've just been going for hours and hours and hours. That is actually something that you want to do. And at this stage of life, it's like, yep, that's what I'm here to do. I'm driven. Maybe 20 years ago, you were like, no, stuff that. I want to enjoy my Sunday afternoon. Yeah, that's what I was like. Anyway, so you enter this new period where you really want to get things done. And I'm like, okay, well, the keto diet's helping, and the stricter I am, the better. And then, like many people, around 2019, I heard Sean Baker on Joe Rogan's podcast, and it was a fantastic episode. I really liked Sean. I felt like I could relate to him. He was talking about how his athletic performance was increasing in his 50s on a carnivore diet where he didn't eat any plants. I was like, wow, that's interesting. Plus, he's a doctor. And he's seen how it can help people's joints. It can help with inflammation. And the whole fact that he was on the rowing machine, I've done rowing before. I know that once you know how to use the rowing machine, that's pretty much it. Like it's not a skill game. It's not like he's getting better at tennis in his 50s because he's playing more tennis. He's literally getting more output. So he's got more strength and he's got more capacity in his lungs. I'm like, okay, this sounds very, very legitimate. Plus, like I think a lot of people, the idea of just eating meat was very appealing to me. I was like, well, I love eating meat and eggs. And so if I can just eat that all the time, that's what I want. That's what I want to eat anyway. And the food prep is going to be so easy. I want to give this a try. So I first tried a strict carnivore diet during one of the COVID lockdowns in 2020. And I felt amazing from the start. And I was like, yeah, this is great. I don't think I had too many. I definitely had the explosive diarrhea, but apart from that, I didn't have too many sort of negative side effects. And I was like, wow, I'd just like to keep going with this. And then I very much fell down the carnivore rabbit hole. So, I started listening to Sean Baker's podcast. And at the time, he would get, a different person on almost every day. And they'd come on and they'd talk about discovering the carnivore diet and this supposedly chronic condition that they had completely healed themselves from. And I'm thinking, wow, really? So, from arthritis to gut problems to mental health problems to autoimmune conditions to all sorts of problems, really stubborn body fat they could never get rid of. It's just falling off on a carnivore diet. And I'm like, this is just unbelievable. So I got very interested in it. And I was like, well, why don't more people know about this? If this is getting to the root cause of these modern diseases that are going like that just keep increasing, why don't more people jump onto a carnivore diet and they'd be able to heal themselves and they wouldn't be spending, the amount of money that people spend on trying to get healthy, going to doctor's visits, spending on medication, just going on this sort of constant merry-go-round where they never really get an answer. I find that very frustrating. And plus all the time wasting and the time wasting for loved ones when they have to just, you constantly appointments and answers and, eventually, well, maybe next week, maybe one more session will do it. It's like, and then things never actually heal, particularly in the mental health space. Like you can speak to some mental health practitioners and they will say, oh, my clients don't ever get better. They just learn to manage it. It's like, okay, so you're literally not healing anyone. Like what is happening here? So I got absolutely fascinated by it. And then I started this Instagram page called How to Carnivore, which was very early days, didn't have that many followers, but just started sharing what I was learning about the carnivore diet, with the intention of helping other people quickly find information about it so that they can learn. And one of the people that I followed on that account was Dr. Anthony Chaffee. And I didn't know who he was at the time. All I knew was that he was a doctor and that he was interested in the carnivore diet, or he did the carnivore diet. And then he posted on his Instagram story, "Hey, I'm stuck in Sydney for 2 weeks." This was during all the sort of COVID malarkey. He couldn't get back to Perth for some reason, so he was quarantining in Sydney, but he was allowed to go anywhere he wanted in Sydney. And then after the 2 week period, he could go back to Perth. Doesn't make any sense. But I just said, do a podcast with me. That's what I replied. But I had no idea how to set up a podcast or how to do anything like that. And fortunately, being the yes man that he is, he was like, "Okay, sure." I was like, "Right, okay, I gotta learn how to set this up." Anyway, I went and caught up with Dr. Chaffee. We had a coffee. I had a coffee. He just had water. And we started talking. And as Rich, as you know, Dr. Chaffee just goes, and it's pretty unbelievable. And I was learning things about history, philosophy, economics, the world, politics, that I had never heard before. And I was very fascinated. And we also obviously talked about carnivore a little bit. And then from there, Dr. Chaffee and I started making his earliest content in my living room. And we began a friendship from there, and then started How to Carnivore. And How to Carnivore has become quite a popular Instagram page, and there's a YouTube channel as well. And it's all about upskilling on the carnivore diet. And it does encourage a strict carnivore diet, which is Dr. Chaffee's approach. So essentially, I've learned the approach from Dr. Chaffee, which is very strict, high-fat carnivore, where generally you eat twice or once a day. There is no sort of ifs or buts. There is no keto crap involved. It's just a very strict program that gets results super fast. And for that reason, we often have people reach out who have quite major chronic health conditions, things like autoimmune conditions or metabolic disorders. And we also have a carnivore challenge. So every month we coach hundreds of people on the carnivore diet. And again, it's about quickly upskilling on carnivore. Yes, the carnivore diet is just eat meat, salt, and water. But a lot of things come up about, energy, stool consistency, quantities of meat, fat to protein ratio, all sorts of questions come up. And it's often the same questions over and over again. So Dr. Chaffee and I hope to answer them quickly. And we also bring in expert guests like you, Rich, who are specialists in a certain field. I know you have a very broad knowledge, but for example, Rich will come in and he'll talk about weight loss, athletes, body composition optimization, and then anything else that people might be interested in. And so we have this collection of experts. We have a platform, and the idea is to help. We've already helped thousands, but the idea would be to be helping thousands every month of people quickly heal themselves. Because the philosophy is essentially put yourself in a position where your body can heal. Because, something that I've learned from Dr. Chaffee and others is that your body is trying to heal itself. Your body does want to be healthy. But the problem is we have so many inputs coming in, whether it's food or some sort of toxicity from our environment. It can also be things like stress, obviously, and, emotional kind of turmoil. But we focus primarily on nutrition and some of the lifestyle things like sunlight and sleep, to put yourself in a position to heal and just let your body do its thing. And in time, you will get great results. And that's what we're finding. So, yeah. That's in a nutshell, Rich. That's my story.
That's incredible. That's the first time that I've heard your story. Wow. So I mean, taking it back to this, you were probably one of the first on the scene in regards to, a Paleolithic type of lifestyle. Gravitating away from the gluten in the early stages.
Yeah.
I mean, this was well ahead of its time, isn't it? I mean, even today, our understanding, at least on the broad spectrum, it's not out there, on mainstream media and through the normal medical so-called professionals. And it goes beyond gluten as well, doesn't it? It goes down to there's something you can test for celiac disease, for example, but there's something called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And I believe it's a spectrum, and I think we're all on it. So, when you said earlier you were shown to have a gluten intolerance, it's like, well, in my opinion, that's everyone. I think,
I agree.
yeah. And I think you pulled there the single most powerful lever that you can pull, because I believe that grains are so damaging that, removing that has allowed you to progress in life and thrive. So in one form or another, I mean, you were one of the first to the party, you know?
Yeah, the whole gluten-free thing was very rare back then. And in some ways, I think I was lucky because it's not like you could walk into the mainstream supermarket and there was a whole aisle dedicated to gluten-free. Back then we would go to some like sort of quirky health food stores and, my mum would sort of hunt out some sort of treat for me that was apparently gluten-free. Um, but the problem today is exactly what you're saying. It's a spectrum, and all humans are intolerant to gluten to some degree. So the answer is not go and eat a whole heap of processed crap that is gluten-free. The answer is that everybody should be minimizing or totally eliminating grains, particularly wheat, because it is damaging to some degree. That's really the message, and move towards the whole foods.
Yeah, 100%. And it's interesting that you mentioned the white rice, because
Mm,
the grains contain, yes, gluten, which breaks down into gliadin, but also wheat germ agglutinin, which is shown to cause intestinal permeability by releasing zonulin in the gut, which is the cause of all autoimmune disease, leaky gut. Um, you've intuitively put in white rice, which is lectin free. So it's white rice. Yes, it's a high in carbohydrate, but it's lectin free. It's one of the very few carbohydrate sources, I suppose, that you could say that doesn't cause like additional problems. So it was out of the carbohydrate sources. I believe white rice to be one of the best sources. So
interesting.
I find it incredible that you've gravitated down that journey naturally, and it's super impressive. And I think I can attest to much of what you're saying in regards to you've found something that has changed your life, and now you've taken to the internet, the socials, your school group, and you're trying to change the lives of others. It's you're talking over 20 years of knowledge that you've gained. You've collaborated with Anthony Chaffee, and incredibly knowledgeable, and you've created this fantastic school group, which helps thousands of people reverse, their illnesses, and even things that maybe they didn't even know that they struggled with. And that's what I
Mm.
found is people come to me for one reason, and then 2 months down the line, oh, there's all of these other things that I didn't, I forgot about, that I just put down to genetics or just to life getting old, and they've all gone away. I mean, it's incredible, and I'm sure you see these success stories daily.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Sometimes people will come in for one thing and then we'll sort of probe them and we'll say, well, has there been any other improvements? Like if somebody comes in for weight loss, for example, it's like, okay, yeah, I've lost 10 kilos, 22 pounds, and I'm really happy with that and it's staying off. Great. Have you noticed any other improvements? Like, well, funny you should mention that. I used to wear glasses, but I don't wear glasses anymore. And you're like, oh my Lord, that is crazy. Or like, I've been on anti-inflammatories for back pain for 20 years, but I don't take them anymore. And you're like, oh, well, that's fairly significant. There are all these sorts of things, or, eczema. I've been on steroids for eczema for however many years, but my skin has really cleared up and I don't need to take it anymore. It is absolutely remarkable how many knock-on effects there are simply by changing your diet. And the thing is, once you study this space and you meet all these people, your perspective on these diseases does really change. And so now, I see a lot of these modern diseases as symptoms and symptoms of generally metabolic dysfunction. And often you'll be diagnosed for your most severe symptom, and that might be diabetes. but you are right on the threshold of being diagnosed with a plethora of other modern health diseases. So it's just sort of somebody might identify as a diabetic, and it's like, well, you've also got like, rheumatoid arthritis, and you've got high blood pressure, and you've got a whole host of other issues. But the one that you have been officially diagnosed with is diabetes.
Yeah, 100%. Yet they all come from the same thing. You know,
Yeah.
it's it's crazy how I began this through as you know my story. I know we won't get into that today, but like gravitating towards this lifestyle was initially to remove the bloat in my stomach, and then 12 months later, 107 pound down, reversed diabetes, off all medication, high blood pressure gone, the whole myriad of conditions completely resolved. And even still, like in recent years, people would say to me, like my eczema, as you just said, is cleared up. And I used to suffer with severe skin conditions. I used to take medicated cream daily. My hands are like baby skin. I don't know what it was, but the dry skin would cause my hands to split, and particularly on the palms, they'd be incredibly dry, constantly. My feet also completely gone away. I used to suffer with these severe boils all over my face and back, completely gone away. And it's crazy how, one thing that we do has all of these downstream deleterious effects, what we put in our mouth. But it makes perfect sense because just from the skin itself, healthy skin begins from within. We start to put lotions and portions on our body, but it's these things grow from inside out. And it just makes perfect sense that if we put the wrong fuel in, then the output isn't going to be correct. You wouldn't put diesel in an F1 race car, you put the wrong fuel in and it'll cause a whole host of problems. Yet when I speak to people on a daily basis, they seem to be so blinded that something so simple can be the answer when doctors and the medical community can't seem to, and it's you can pick any illness that you want, and I guarantee that either you or I or Anthony has worked with someone who has reversed that completely. And again, we're not here to give medical advice, but this is first-hand experience. Can you attest to any of those stories in complete reversal of things that drugs couldn't fix?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just to further that point, you're right. For the average person, if I approach somebody and I tell them about what I do, and I want to have this kind of conversation, the idea that food can have such a big impact on our health, most people have no idea. And they're like, oh, changing up my diet could be a benefit. It's like, no, it can completely transform your life. And unfortunately, we've so lost track of what is appropriate food for humans that it's just super confusing, because we have been able in recent years to survive on a diet that is totally inappropriate. And it's a diet that is rich in grains. It is essentially plant-based. You have a look at a burger and fries and a Coca-Cola, and it's 95% plants. You've got this thin burger patty in there. And it's so processed, but we have been able to survive somehow on that. And that's really misleading because it implies that, well, maybe that's fine, but it's totally not. And something that just sort of on that topic, we had the Regenerate conference about a week and a half ago, and Dr. Gary Fettke, one of his first slides at the conference, was just a photo of the Queen of England, and that's it. And he said, what's all this about? And he said, I'm not here to say, God save the Queen or anything like that. He's saying, this is the original low carber. This is the original real food person. Because for centuries, or for as long as, we can remember or record, royalty have eaten a diet that is much closer to a proper human diet than anybody else in the society. And you think about the Queen having access to all the game meat, to pasture-raised pork, to some of the best beef you can possibly eat, to incredible seafood being shipped in. That's where the nutrition for the royalty comes in. And in today's day and age, where we have access to so much food, I believe we're very lucky, because I know that in Australia, even if you're on the minimum wage, you can have access to the most incredible grass-fed and grass-finished beef, plus amazing fresh seafood, and you can choose to eat like that. And so that's sort of a message that I really want to get out there, that that is actually how people are supposed to eat. In times gone by, the mass population has been subjugated to a diet that is inappropriate for humans, that is very much a just purely survival diet, which might be potatoes and grains. And you got to try and an occasional meat once a week. You got to try and scrape together a life off that. But these days, we can all eat like the Queen of England. We have that opportunity. So that's a big part of what I want to get out there.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, you go, Rich.
It's interesting that you say, you mentioned about like McDonald's and processed foods, burgers and fries, and we see this as being food, but most of us would regard that as being unhealthy. But I think the biggest problem for me is when people, like you've mentioned, oh look, food can be incredibly life-changing, and then the instant thought goes towards grains and seed oils, and they're fruit and veg, they're 5 fruit and veg a day. And I think that's a huge stumbling block for me, because even people who are willing to make those healthier choices and come away from the processed foods, they're actually putting in toxic compounds that are probably causing just as much damage as the processed foods. And I think that makes it incredibly difficult, because now you're telling someone who's willing to make a healthier, lifestyle choice, that the vegetables and the grains that they're consuming are detrimental. If I see a bowl of muesli with a chopped up banana or some berries, it looks healthy because it's been so ingrained, pardon the pun, but so ingrained that these things are healthy, that you look at it and like for a split second now, it's like, oh, that, but we know we've had to reprogram and learn and teach ourselves that actually, well, no, this isn't human food. And when you look into the history of vegetables and grains, they're not what they once were. They've been incredibly hybridized, crossbred, and they no longer, resemble what they used to in nature. Fruits, even, apples and bananas, carrots, pick your pick. They no longer resemble what they used to. But for me, that's the biggest trouble. That is the hardest stumbling block, because now, you've got a group of people who are not interested in making change. They understand that they're sick, but they don't want to give up their processed foods, so they'll happily take their medication. And unfortunately, those people, I've tried to work with, but they become black holes because they just suck all your energy and they waste your time. So now you want to focus on the people who are willing to make the change, but now you're trying to tell them that their broccoli is not good for them and their grains with their chopped up banana is not good for them. That, for me, is a huge problem, because now you tell them to eat red meat, which apparently causes cancer. You tell them to salt their meals, which causes apparently high blood pressure. You're telling them to consume lots of fatty cuts of meat, which apparently increases your cholesterol and risk of cardiovascular disease, and so on and so forth. That is the biggest thing for me, So do you find the same problem when you're trying to teach people in regards to healthier living?
Yeah, so if you speak to the average person and you sort of try and encourage them to become healthy, that is a massive challenge. I've definitely given up on doing that. I'm trying to convince people that I can't do it. Dr. Chafe, you can do it. I can't do it. But try to explain to them that hey, all these broccoli, carrots, stuff like that are actually doing damage. They're not healthy. That's not real food. Also, I think the muesli is a really good example, because I know exactly what you mean. I still see muesli, fruit, yogurt, stuff like that, and people think, oh, that's a nice, healthy, light breakfast. That's a good way to start the day. But we know it's just loaded with sugar. So the people that come to the Carnivore Challenge, they have, it's an Australian expression, but we say they've been through the ringer. They have had an absolutely terrible time. And, they have been from doctor to doctor. They have carried stubborn weight there, for decades. A lot of the people who do our Carnivore Challenge are women, and they're women in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. And they're either going through menopause or they've been through menopause, and they have been told their entire lives to eat a lot of plants and to not eat any animals or saturated fat. And for that reason, they have been starving for decades, and they've picked up these chronic conditions. They have stubborn weight that they can't let go of because their body is so undernourished that it's just holding on to every bit of energy and nutrition that it can on its body. So this particular group of people is a group that I did not expect to be working with. You know, when I created How to Carnivore, you know, I didn't expect that, oh, the most clued in and most, you know, open-minded people are going to be the women my mother's age. But it turns out that is the case. And these women are getting incredible results through our program. You know, we've had instances of women who are 50, they've been through menopause, they haven't had a cycle for a few years, and they will get their cycle back simply because their body just starts functioning the way that it was. You know, we have a lot of people come in and they've got Hashimoto's, and you know, it's really, really affecting their lives and really affecting their quality of life. And after about 6 months, it's like the antibodies aren't there. I don't have Hashimoto's anymore. The symptoms are gone, and I'm starting to lose weight. You know, we have people come in with diabetes. It's like, you know, oh, my doctor says I have type 2 diabetes. Okay, great. Cut out all the carbs and sugar. 1 month later, all right, I'm not on any exogenous insulin. My blood sugar is perfect. The whole diabetes thing was just a phase. It's like, okay, cool. Well, if you go back to eating the way you were before, the diabetes is going to come back. But for now, you have absolutely conquered it. You know, a good friend of mine, Melissa, she was an active person. She's been a canine dog trainer her entire life. Her arthritis got so bad that she couldn't get up out of a chair. And so there's no way that she was going to be walking her dog. On a ketogenic carnivore diet, she eats lots of fatty fish. She does intermittent fasting. She eats fatty grass-fed meat. She's now up out of the chair and she's shoveling snow off her front driveway. And her quality of life is just so much better. So we see people who are open to it make these changes. And it seems extreme at first because it's like, oh, you know, I have to give up, you know, not only the sort of cakes and the coffee, but when I go out for, you know, lunch with my friends, you know, I'm just having the steak. You know, I'm not having the chips and the salad. You know, that seems so challenging. But really, once you get into it, it's very achievable. And you go out and you realize there is always meat on the menu. And, you know, you're not as hungry all the time. Your quality of life improves so much. People get over it and you just put yourself first and you get these incredible results. So it never ceases to astound myself and Dr. Chafee that this simple change in diet can have such a profound effect on people's lives. It definitely does surprise me still. And, you know, I'll go through phases where, you know, life gets in the way and I haven't been listening to many carnivore podcasts or I haven't been connecting with too many people in that space. And you sort of just forget about it for a few days or for a week. And then when you come back into the community and you start talking to people, it's like, oh yeah, this is, you know, it's not, I don't want to call it like a silver bullet because it does cure all these chronic conditions, as you and I have seen so many times. But what it's really doing is it's stripping out a lot of the harmful stuff. So, you know, we're not telling you to take one particular supplement or one particular pill that is going to fix all these problems for you, but we are telling you to strip out all these things that are causing major issues that you're not even aware are causing major issues. And then we'll give you the nutrition that will get all your nutrient levels up to the healthy range where they should be. And we're going to give you that nutrition in a way that isn't going to cause any problems, because that's also part of the problem. If you eat fatty red meat, no spices, no seasonings, no sauces, you are getting the perfect human nutrition that you need. It has the perfect amount of amino acids. It has all the nutrients that you need to thrive, and it doesn't have any of the downside of eating these plant foods. You know, we had somebody on our program, absolutely lovely lady who was in her 50s, and she was of Native American descent. And she had, by default, been eating a carnivore diet for 40 years because she pretty quickly cottoned on that that's how she was supposed to eat because of her origins. You know, traditionally, Native Americans would hunt bison and other game animals, and that's just what they would eat. There are not many, if any, edible plants out there. So she knew that. So that's what she would eat, and that's what she felt best. You know, just a little adjunct to that. That's how everyone should be eating because we're all humans. But she knew because of her family history, that's what she should eat. So great. But she had in her garden always grown herbs and spices, and they were organic, and they were supposedly healthy, and she would add that to her meat. So she was a very healthy person, attractive woman in her 50s. But she did have lingering issues. Like she had some joint pain. She was starting to get a little bit of arthritis, sore back, things like that. And Dr. Chafee straight away said, "What are you doing adding all these plants, seasonings, spices to your meat?" "Oh, they're fine. They're from my garden. They're local. They're organic. This is what I've always done. They're perfectly fine." No, these often the spices are made from the seeds of the plants, and it's actually the most toxic part of the plant. So you really, really want to avoid those, and cutting them out will make a massive difference. No, it can't be that much of a difference. I just want to keep doing what I'm doing. Anyway, eventually she tries it. This is what happens, by the way. We do a lot of back and forth with people because it takes a bit of convincing when you have to sort of change somebody's paradigm. Anyway, she tried it, and basically instantly she noticed a positive difference. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm sleeping better. Don't have sinus issues. My back isn't hurting anymore. That made a huge difference. Inflammation has gone. And since then, she dug out the veggie garden, and that's just a thing of the past. She has moved on. So it can be really hard, like you were saying. We've got these paradigms in our mind. We've got this understanding of how things should work. We've got this understanding of this is impossible. This is the way it should be. I feel uncomfortable cutting out the plants from my diet. Well, where does that come from? That comes from conditioning. And if you're truly a critical thinker, you'll do more research than just say, and then just rely on, what you've been told by ads and parents and all that sort of thing for your whole life. And you might even try the carnivore diet. And if you try it even for a week, you will notice massive differences. You might not feel 100% incredible because you might still be getting fat adapted, but you'll definitely notice things like the mental health benefits, the inflammation going, deeper concentration. You'll lose a lot of water weight, which will feel really good. So you will feel a lot of the benefits even in a week. And if you're curious, just try it. It's not a big deal. You end up eating fantastic foods like beautiful steaks and seafood and basically any meat and eggs that you want. So just give it a go.
100%. I completely agree. I think, I used to be an avid gardener, believe it or not. I used to have, my garden was full of vegetables. I had a greenhouse where I used to grow all sorts of things in. And at the time, I just started my ketogenic journey and I was thriving. And if in that moment you told me that what I was consuming was bad for me, I wouldn't have believed you because I felt healthier and fitter than I ever had prior. But the reason for that was that I was producing ketones, and this was offsetting much of the damage. And the ketones were supplying the energy to my brain, and it was blocking inflammation. So it was almost offsetting and undoing lots of the negative effects of the fruits and veg that I was consuming. And then, in work, it's difficult. It takes a long time to cook vegetables, so and it takes me a few minutes to fry a steak. So over the course of 6 months, I stopped cooking veg, and I had to take pause for thought one day because it'd been 6 months. I hadn't consumed any vegetables. Well, where are my nutrients coming from? Where are all my vitamins and minerals coming from? Maybe I should put them back in. But I feel better than I've ever felt before. So then this led me into investigating, as you said, the properties of the animal proteins, the amino acid profile, the vitamin and mineral profile. And it took a long time. But when I got to the bottom of this, I found that plants don't only not contain the nutrients that we're told, most of them are far lower in quantity, or they're bound to other compounds which prevent them from being absorbed and utilized properly. And the ones that are in there are quite often in plant form and not in human form. And they are two different things. Vitamin A being, the obvious one. No plant contains vitamin A. True vitamin A is retinol. Plants contain beta carotene. And it's interesting you mentioned thyroid problems because vitamin A or beta carotene from plants can contribute to that because we use T4 in order to convert beta carotene into retinol. So if we have thyroid problems, we're lowering T4 and then, its ability to convert into T3. But whatever we do convert, into retinol. We need that retinol then to help convert the T4 into T3. So if we are lucky enough to convert and create enough T3, we're now devoid of vitamin A in the body. And it's the same when we look at all of these different vitamins and minerals. I stripped them all out and I've never felt better. In recent times, I've even, up until, 2 years ago, I was still consuming black pepper. Now, black pepper contains a compound called piperine, which blocks phase 2 detoxification in the liver. When I took that out, the aches and pains went away. I used to suffer with cold sores. They all went away. I cannot touch. If I touch black pepper in the slightest amount now, my early warning alarm systems blaze, and it basically tells me that, I'm eating this toxin. I do believe plants make medicines, and this is where it comes from in history. I think plants are medicines, and if we need medication, fantastic, but medication should be used in the short term, not as seasonings on our food and things, and I understand it's an incremental approach and we're all in a different place, but for me, the stricter that I become, the healthier that I feel, and I'm sure you can attest to that also.
Yes, I feel the exact same way. Look, I think for me, carnivore is actually quite a lot about pleasure, and I'm much more motivated by moving towards pleasure than avoiding pain. Like I'm just sort of one of those people. I think other people are more worried about avoiding pain. I'd rather just move towards something that is pleasurable and that will make me happy now, but also long term. And like you're saying, the stricter I am carnivore, the better I feel. So you're presented with these options all the time. When you go out at home, it's dead easy. When you go out, you're presented with these options of, do I have that side salad, or do I, partake in the dessert or what have you? But in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, I want to feel really great, later today and then tomorrow. So I sort of move towards that. And then also with the taste thing, it's amazing how your taste buds can really change, and you can start to just absolutely love the simplicity of eating meat with maybe a little bit of butter and a little bit of salt, but you can actually taste the meat. So, something like pepper is, when I was growing up, I would always have a bit of salt and pepper on my meal because that was a habitual thing. And, I liked the flavor. But now, I'd be very disappointed if somebody put pepper on my steak, because I'd be like, oh, not only am I going to feel crap, but I don't actually get to enjoy this. And I'd be thinking, oh, do I maybe just skip this and go and have a steak at home that is cooked exactly how I like it? So your taste buds do change. And the idea that you're missing out on something, that's not such a thing. You actually start to look forward to those special meals that you can make for yourself, or maybe one or two places that can really nail a steak or really do great seafood, and that's actually what you crave. So I don't think that you miss out on anything as a carnivore, and the benefits of how you feel and your overall health just way more than any potential flavor benefit you get from some pepper or spices or what have you.
100%. Yep, I completely agree. I think what would your tips be for someone who is new to carnivore, but they have a life in which it's quite social. They meet friends for lunch. You've already mentioned that there's always a meat dish on the menu, but what are your tips? And I completely agree with what we're saying. I'm happy with just a big, nice, juicy, fatty cut of steak, and I think it's the nicest thing ever. And I eat it pretty much every day. I've got a protocol when I go out. But interesting to hear your thoughts and advice to the listeners.
Yeah, sure. So for me, definitely eating before I go out is an absolute no-brainer. So if let's say I'm going to dinner with friends, definitely have a steak before I go. So that way that when I get there, I'm really not thinking about food. And sometimes I'll have quite a big steak and I'm actually totally satiated and it's just not even really a concern. And I might go to my parents' place sometimes and my mum will say, oh, you ate before you came, didn't you? And I'll be like, yeah, but I enjoyed it and it was great. And now I know that when the meal comes out, I can just have a little bit of the meat and I'm happy. I'm not looking to really get my nutrition when I'm out because I know that I'm fully nourished And if there happens to be something like a good carnivore option, then I'll just get stuck into that. One of the other things that you need to consider is that no one's looking at your plate and no one cares about what you're having. People care about themselves and getting that dish that they're really looking forward to. They might say, "Oh, that looks good," and then they just move straight on to their own meal. So not once, not once has anyone noticed when I go to a pub and I get my steak that I didn't eat the salad. I have never had anyone comment, because people are generally thinking, "Oh, I wish I could just ignore the salad and didn't have to eat it," but they feel sort of, guilty, or they think that, they paid for it, so they should eat it, or it's part of their meal or what have you. So they eat it, but people don't say anything when I just don't eat the salad. So getting a steak at a pub is a very easy option. Of course, you pay for it. You pay about 3 or 4 times more than you do when you're at home. But that's, you're going out there to socialize. I find I love drinking sparkling water. So, for me, I thought it was going to be a massive deal that I don't drink coffee anymore. And I couldn't really get my head around that. And I'm like, oh, but I've always drunk coffee. And that's the social thing to do. Literally nobody cares. And I'll often order for people and I'll be like, okay, coffees. And then I'll just get myself a bottle of sparkling water and no one cares. They got their coffee. They don't care. So they're sort of very, very easy options. Eat before you go out. And also know that if you skip a meal, there's a perfect steak or lamb chops or whatever your favorite meat is waiting for you at home. So you're gonna get your food. You don't have to give in and eat stuff that's gonna make you feel terrible later on.
100%. Yeah. I don't find it difficult. I used to. The first thing that I ask when I go to the restaurant is, what are they cooking? And it's always seed oils. So I'll tell them, look, I've got a slight allergy to seed oil. Can you either cook in no oil, just grill it, pan fry, or use butter? And most restaurants are accommodating with that. Sometimes I'll order 2 steak dishes because one isn't enough. And yes, you pay a little bit more, but you save on everything else because I no longer consume takeaways, which used to cost me 30 to 40 pounds a week. Now my entire shop is like 60 quid a week. So it's considerably cheaper. My shop used to be 150 pounds and now it's down to like 40 to 60 pounds. So if
and
I
alcohol
have,
too.
yeah, exactly. Alcohol, huge contributor. I don't buy any of the cosmetics that I used to, so everything has come right down. I don't even use toothpaste any longer. No deodorant. So I'm really careful with what I put onto my skin. So I save a fortune. So if I need to eat more, if I need to, order more when I'm out, that's fine. There's always a meat dish or a fish dish, or I'll combine the two, or eggs. Most pubs and restaurants will cook you an egg or 4, in my case. So I'll usually have a steak, the largest one that they do, with some eggs. Occasionally I'll have like some king prawns or something, or shrimp, for the guys in the States. So I get on well with seafood. I know some people within Carnivore do not, but it works well for me. But I don't struggle, is my point. And as you say, I always preference no plant compounds on there. They're just wasting the time because I won't eat them. So in essence, yes, you pay a little bit more, but you do save in the long run because it's not something that you do every day. And I think it's incredibly easy. But as you say, that food is waiting for you at home anyway, and there are cheap alternatives. People will say that living carnivore is expensive. It saves me an absolute fortune. If you buy in bulk, it's less expensive. Ground beef or minced beef, incredibly cheap. If you're into organ meats, they're incredibly cheap. But, if you support your local butcher, for example, and buy in bulk, more often than not, they'll look after you and you'll save an absolute fortune. And as you say, for me, I find this incredibly indulgent. I look forward to eating my just steak. What do you want with it? I don't want anything with it. You have to have something with it. Well, why? I just want steak. If I'm having anything with my steak, it's another steak, So it's, or lamb or something maybe. Lamb is incredibly beneficial. I would argue it's probably more beneficial than grass-fed beef. If not, it's at least on the same. It's certainly on par. Lamb is always grass-fed, and I'm not fortunate to live in the UK because it's always rainy here compared to where you guys are. But I'm fortunate in regards to the source of lamb is abundant. So I eat lamb, quite often. It's always a split between beef and lamb for me. But Simon, I think you've some fantastic advice there. The group sounds brilliant, super supportive. The group is full. It's a fantastic community. So could you give us a little bit of detail about the group, where we can find you, how people can sign up? Obviously, I'll pop all of those links below. But where can people find you?
Yeah, sure. How to Carnivore. So go to How to Carnivore on Instagram, YouTube, or howtocarnivore.com and get stuck in. We'll help you go carnivore very quickly, and we'll make sure that you get the results as fast as possible.
As easy as that. Fantastic. Simon, my man, long time overdue. Been an absolute pleasure. I think we've got so much more we could get into. So
Yeah,
if you're up for it, we'll get you back on, in the next few weeks, or whenever you're
would love
available.
to.
Fantastic. But man, appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time. Take care, and I will see you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rich.